Tonight, I want to share the kind of bizarre tale of Corpsewood Manor in the North Georgia mountains. The story actually begins, though, in Chicago in the 1980s. There was a professor at the Loyola University. He was professor of pharmacology, Dr. Charles Scudder, and his assistant, who also was his life partner, Joseph Odom. And the gentlemen decided they were disillusioned with the life in the big city in Chicago, and they wanted a more serene and peaceful lifestyle. So they looked around for property, and they eventually settled on a 40-acre tract in the remote North Georgia mountains on Taylor's Ridge. They sold their house, sold most of their worldly possessions, and they bought this 40 acres in North Georgia and settled there. They named the property Corpsewood Manor because when they had initially surveyed the property, it was wintertime and all the trees were bare, and Dr. Scudder said that it reminded him of corpses, that the bare trees reminded him of corpses. So that's how it's got its name. But these gentlemen basically built a sprawling medieval style castle in the middle of the North Georgia woods without the aid of modern power tools or equipment. This was totally off grid. They built this by hand, brick by brick. They even hand chiseled a staircase out of the side of Taylor's Ridge. No electricity, no running water. They lived off the land a lot. They made their own homemade wine. Now, the gentlemen were eccentric, I guess would be the best way to say it. Uh, Dr. Scudder was a confirmed member of the LaVeyan sect of the Church of Satan, the Anton LaVey. Uh, they made stained glass windows uh, by hand for this castle of depicting Baphomet and pentagrams. They had a pink gargoyle. They had a statue of Mephistopheles. Uh, they had a human skull, I think that Dr. Scudder had acquired from his professorship. And they were just different gentlemen. But by all means, they were very friendly, very peaceful, and just saw a peaceful and secluded, isolated lifestyle. And that's what they had. Now, they did have to make occasional trips to town for supplies, and they did so in a black Jeep with pentagrams emblazoned on the sides. So it's safe to say they drew the attention of the locals. So they were eventually known in the community. Not only that, but Taylor's Ridge is a popular hunting spot. I've actually hunted Taylor's Ridge myself when I was younger. It's still a pretty popular spot for hunting. But they became known to the locals. And these gentlemen also made their own homemade wine. They had a chicken coop, a 3-story chicken coop that they had built. The first level was a chicken coop. The mid-level was basically a collection of adult movies. And the third level was painted pink, and they named it the Pink Room. It was mostly just mattresses, and that was where they would host parties. So as they got known by the locals, the locals would come to visit and hang out. And one of these locals, a hunter named Kenneth Avery Brock, befriended them somewhat. Definitely became acquainted with the gentleman, and had came several times to visit the property. Now it occurred to him, that these gentlemen, in his mind, these gentlemen must be rich. They had this sprawling castle out in the middle of the woods. Dr. Scudder had a gold encrusted harp. They saw all these signs, and to them, this represented wealth. Uh, Kenneth Brock had a friend, Tony West, and As Brock became acquainted with Scudder and Odom, he had been talking to his friend Tony West about what he'd seen there. So inevitably, this evolved into them concocting a plan to rob Dr. Scudder and Mr. Odom. They thought that they were going to get rich. So one night, it was actually December 12th of 1982. So just one day ago was the anniversary of this event. They showed up at Scudder and Odom's property under the premise of wanting some homemade wine just to hang out and party. So, of course, the friendly and peaceful hosts that they were, they invited West and Brock up, and they began to party and get loose. And that's when they were taken by surprise. And let's just say that Dr. Scudder and Mr. Odom, that was their last night. They were never they were never heard from again. Okay. Um, after the event, they raided the house. They ransacked the house, and they didn't find anything. The harp was too big for them to fit in their vehicle. So basically, for all this, they had just a handful of jewelry and a dagger is all they made off with. And they fled, but they weren't gone long. It was only a few days. Now, Kenneth Brock, the one that had befriended them initially, he turned himself in. He was evidently overwrought with guilt, and he turned himself in. And then Mr. West, he came a couple of days later. He actually turned himself in Chattanooga. So for all of the trouble and all the efforts, it was all in vain, and it was all totally unnecessary. Just for a couple of gentlemen who were ultimately misunderstood. You know, they were different. They 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 caused a stir in the community because of this difference, and because they were friendly and trusting, it ultimately did not bode well for them. Well, the thing that's creepy the most about this story for me is that ahead of time that Mr. Scudder had painted a portrait of his own end. And when they actually discovered Mr. Scudder, the similarities were just striking. There were five points of reference that corresponded to the painting and to the actual finding of Mr. Scudder. So it was just really bizarre. This whole story is really bizarre, but it's tragic because these gentlemen were ultimately just misunderstood, and the community that they had placed their faith in, their trust in, wound up turning on them because their beliefs were different. So anyway, this is Jay's Haunted Appalachia. Welcome, by the way. I have been meaning to get this particular channel started for a while, so I really hope I'm going to have at least one full-length video a week on Saturdays. We're going to start it out with one and evolve it from there. But I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I am from East Tennessee, born and raised here, lived here all my life. I mean, I traveled some. I've traveled extensively through Appalachia, but I've always loved our stories, our rich history of folklore, spooky stories. I grew up on them. I had my first paranormal experience when I was very young. I couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. And I've been a paranormal nerd ever since. I read every 13 Ghost and Jeffrey book there was. when I was a kid. In fact, anything, if it was about paranormal or cryptids in my library, even from first grade on, I was checking it out. I was that kid. So I've always been fascinated with this sort of thing. And I've always loved the classics and just the true paranormal encounters that can't be easily explained, passed on from in the oral tradition and written tradition. And I want to start sharing these stories with you because I feel that they are important. They're important enough to document and preserve for future generations. They're part of our culture, they're part of our history, and they don't need to be embellished and sensationalized like seems to be the trend now. So I'm just trying to do my part to document and preserve some of these stories. And thank you for tuning in. I hope you'll tune in again next week for the next episode of Jay's Haunted Appalachia.